welcome to Shelf Indulgence. I'm Katie from the Union Township branch.
And I'm Vic from the Union Township branch.
And today we're going to be talking about a genre that might not be familiar to some of you. It's a newer genre that's just popped up in the past 10 years, so it's pretty new for libraries as well, and it's called the new adult genre.
Now, the new adult genre is a genre between young adult and adult fiction, and it's for those who are ready to move tonally away from young adult fiction, but aren't quite ready for adult fiction, which focuses on settled adult life.
Right, and it's not necessarily about the age of the characters that makes it one or the other. It's really about how they handle the themes within the books that makes it new adult specifically.
Yes, young adult fiction has a lot of very dark themes, but they're handled very differently from adult or new adult fiction.
Right, so Vic and I went ahead and read some of the books that are considered new adult. I read Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell.
And I read Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson.
And both of these books can be found in our collection or online, so feel free to check them out if we pique your interest on them. So Fangirl is about a girl named Cather who is going and starting off in college, and it is a really heavily themed book about transitioning into that period and how you're finding yourself when you're no longer in the environment you've been in for up to the past 18 years.
For your whole life, really.
Right, exactly. So the book really deals, one of the heavy themes is that transition from one to the other. The other hard thing for Cather is that she was a twin. And so now she's at that point in college where her and her twin are no longer next to each other every day and being associated with each other as twins. Now she has to become her own person. It also deals with her transition from things that she may have liked in high school that were really important and she was very passionate about, and going into college where those passions are still there, but not having the same group of friends or the same environment that nurtured those passions.
Just leaving behind that whole life you had in high school.
Exactly. So she's trying to deal with what that means for her and how her fan fiction writing, which is where the book focuses, and how that applies to now what she wants to do as a career and the world of creative writing, what that means. So she's kind of developing herself through that as well. The some of the other big themes in this book are they're very adult themes, but the one that it focuses on is your transition from your relationship with your parents and how you're viewing each other, because now you're at a point where you are considered an adult and you are expected to take care of yourself. So there is this point where you're like, how do I handle my parents and I? Like, are we at the equal level now? Are they still an authority figure? Do I become less of a child and more of a another adult being that gets to be at the same level as them?
So you're no longer just a child looking up to your parent as an adult. You're now someone who has to acknowledge that you are also an adult and your relationship is going to change with them.
Right, and that can be seen in one of the big plot points of the book, which is her father who suffers from manic depression. And she has to deal with, now that she's away at college, she's not seeing those signs anymore that she had seen when she was living at home. And now she has to have that talk with herself of, do I now still have that responsibility to watch over my dad while I'm still growing as an adult as well? And so there's some scenes where she has to really sit down and say, do I have to let this go and disconnect myself from this because I am no longer there, I am no longer present for these events that are happening. That also, you can see that in her sister. It also deals with alcoholism as well, because her and her sister were always together. There was some sort of monitoring going on between the two of them that allowed Cather to keep a watchful eye on her sister. But now that they're in college and they're not spending as much time together, she has no idea what's going on in her sister's life, and that accumulates through the alcoholism that happens with her sister.
And so she has to she doesn't get to see her sister every day anymore, so they cannot watch over each other, which makes sense, but she has to also act as an adult in her sister's life, it seems like, when her sister is struggling with growing up, while she has to face that she is growing up and she has to assist her sister in doing that process as well, it seems like.
Right, and there's a lot of things kind of accumulating together. So she's transitioning into this new period of life. She's trying to figure out what's going on with her and her dad and how that relationship is developing, and what is happening with her sister now that it is no longer Cather and her sister Ren. So when they were in high school, it was always Cather is with Ren and Ren is with Cather. And now it is just Cather, and some people don't even know she's a twin. So it's a big step where you're seeing that transition happening, which is a lot of what we see in new adults. That transitioning is a big theme in new adult, from one to the other, and it's very interesting. I related to Cather on a personal level. I moved states away from where I grew up, where I knew everyone most of my life, and it was a big struggle for me in college to kind of figure out, well, what do I do now? I don't have any of the friend group I had in high school near me 24/7. Now I have this whole new group of people who I have never known before, and now I have to make those relationships with them as well. And that's actually one of the big plots in Fangirl is she's now developing this relationship with others that she may or may not have done previously, because she was so secure in her friend group at home. So it's a very interesting read. It was very surreal for me to read because I felt like I was experiencing
very similar things to your own life.
Right. And so it was like, oh, I do that. Or I did that, or I experienced that. So it was, as a young adult, it was really cool to be able to actually, for once, put myself in the position of a character that was similar in age to me and who had gone through some of the things that I had gone through. So I really enjoyed Fangirl, and I look forward, I think, to reading more of the new adult.
That author.
Exactly, yeah. I don't know if you saw any of those themes in Mistborn, or if there was just some different themes that you were seeing.
Yeah, Mistborn had some very similar themes, just in a very different genre. Mistborn is a fantasy heist novel set in an alternate universe. It follows Vin, who grows up. She's found by a heist group in the city who recognize that she has very similar powers to them. So they pull her out of the situation she's in as a young adult, a child, and they teach her how to use her powers, and they teach her how to live in the world. And she starts out in the beginning of the story as someone who's very young and has little to no power and has a lot of people who kind of lord that over her. And she moves into a position where she's being taught how to use her powers, she's being taught how to live in society, and she can kind of come into her own and transition into a young woman. And it definitely focuses on her coming into power and her coming into responsibility and her leading parts of this group that you wouldn't think that they would trust to a young woman, but they really do see her as a young adult, not as a child. Even very early, they give her responsibilities and let her think about subjects that you might not normally associate with childhood, but we're able to see her grow into an adult person in this book.
Right, and you talked about how in that first meeting, like, immediately you can see how they are treating her as a young adult, because she's, 16 in the novel?
She grows to a 16-year-old, so they find her fairly young. I think it's a few years before that, and then she grows into a 16-year-old throughout the main first book. And so, yes, she is a teenager, and she is what we might consider a child, but they're treating her like an adult. They're giving her responsibilities, and she really is able to take hold of that.
Right, they're kind of on mutual level, at equal levels, and then at some point, even her being so young, she starts to surpass those levels.
Yes, she has her mentor who has really led her through this process, but then eventually she's able to kind of move past him and make her own decisions and move into her own life instead of just following him around and what he's doing.
Yeah, the story itself, I know that you're more familiar with it than I am, but the story itself is very interesting in how they handle Vin's character, like you were saying, because she, even before she's interacting with anyone, the story presents her as a young adult.
Yes, the way that she thinks and the way she interacts with the world around her very much is someone who's gone through a lot and who really has had to come up into her own and look at the world in an entirely different way. So we never start out with her feeling like a child. She always does feel like she's already got that thing that showed the world to her in a different way, that brought her to needing to be an adult. And while there are a lot of young adult books that have very similar characters who've gone through similar things, Tamora Pierce has the Alana series, which follows Alana through her journey from becoming a squire and a young knight and becoming an adult. While she has a very similar journey there, she always is kind of seen as a child. The people around her, the people that she's interacting with, definitely see her as a young child, even once she's a little bit more grown. But for Vin, it's very much, they see her as she is, they see how smart she is, they see how worldly she is and what she's seen of the world, and they take that and they just accept it.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned Tamara, because those are such a clear and concise book to show that transition. Whereas later on, she, in other books that are within that same realm, Alana is seen as an adult, but in her specific series, she is seen as a child throughout the majority of them. Yes. Even though at some point she is a full-fledged knight and she is doing things that would be considered adult.
Yes. And even as a child in those books, she really is doing very adult. She has a lot of quests that she undertakes. She gets a lot done. She saves the world. But she's doing it from a child's perspective.
Right. So it's completely different from how we're introduced to Ven in the Mistborn books. And I think that's a good analysis of what really the difference is between young adult and new adult.
Yes.
Because they handle those characters that really are on a similar footing to each other so differently, and the perspective is what changes that for us.
Exactly.
So we also read a graphic novel that is also considered new adult. It's called Ghosted in LA, and that holds some of the similar themes that we were seeing in Mistborn and Fangirl as well. Kind of a little bit of a mixture of the two, where in Fangirl you have Cather transitioning into college, you have your main character in Ghosted also transitioning to college and redeveloping her relationships. The big one being now she has also moved states away, and her best friend and her are no longer connected. They're no longer seeing each other every day, and they're having to reevaluate that friendship as well. And I think there was also a relationship with her boyfriend where he was trying to find himself as well, and there's some conflict there between the two of them.
Yes, and it's very much so in Ghosted. She has been forced to make these changes, to approach herself in a different way, whereas I feel like in Fangirl and in Mistborn, they do have a little more authority over their story. They choose to do a lot of the things that they do that force them to change. In Ghosted, the journey starts out and she's kind of forced onto her own, and she has to make these decisions in that space where her best friend and her boyfriend have kind of left her to find herself. So that's a very different trigger to the situation than the other two books.
Yes, because like you said, they're making those decisions in Fangirl and in Mistborn that, or I guess even in Mistborn, there's not even a decision, she just is. Yes. Whereas in this one, I think if there was not that moment where she had lost everyone she was close to, she might have continued to view the world as we would consider a teenager to view the world. But it is very interesting when that breaking point happens and she meets the literal ghost in LA. They immediately treat her as another adult, similar to how we saw with Mistborn and how that treatment was handled as well.
And in this situation, she really is still going through the transition to an adult, and yet they kind of help her along by seeing her as already having gone through it and having her own autonomy and making her own decisions and having her own place in their household.
Right, and they have her do things for them that I don't think you would ever ask a teenager to do for you.
Certainly.
And it deals with death, it deals with a lot of heavy topics that I think we're watching the main character kind of understand that now she is in the real world because she has been forced in, and not that when you're a teenager those things aren't real, but now you're on your own. Now it is up to you to make those decisions on your own.
Yes.
And I think we see that very clearly when we're talking about ghosted, because it like you said, it's so vivid, that transition, because it is forced upon the main character.
And these characters are all at different ages when they make these realizations too. It's not, as we said before, that they're all going off to college and becoming adults. It's that they have reached a point in which they have to transition into a new phase of their life, and they're all going about it at different times, but in very similar ways. They're realizing things about the world around them, or they're being taught how to interact with the world around them. And so you see that despite the fact that Vin is very young, and despite the fact that the other two are a little older and going to college, they all have that same journey through their lives.
Right. So those are just a couple of the themes that we found in our reading. I really enjoyed all of the books that we decided we were going to read. And I wasn't even surprised by that. I was actually really glad we were getting, as a young adult, to read our own age group for once and be able to connect with those. If you guys want to watch more videos, feel free to check us out at our website. It's clermontlibrary.org.
And we would love to hear from you. Please comment down below what you think of the new adult genre and any other topics you'd like us to cover.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time. I'm Katie.
And I'm Vic, and this has been Shelf Indulgence.